Right, let me read for us from Mark chapter 14, verses 66 to 72. It's on page 1022 in the Bibles in front of you, or it's on the screen. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. "You also were with the Nazarene, Jesus," she said, but he denied it. "I don't know or understand what you are talking about," he said, and went out into the entrance. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing round them, "This fellow is one of them." Again he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, "Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." He began to call down curses and he swore at them, "I don't know this man you're talking about." Immediately the cock crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. "Before the cock crows twice, you will disown me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. Father God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that it speaks truth. We pray that you would open our hearts to receive your message of truth willingly into our own lives. Please give us ears to hear and hearts and minds to understand. In your name I pray. Amen.
Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to come and share God's word with you. We just heard, we're continuing the series that you have already been about with the Gospel of Mark. And speaking of Mark, I wish to I pray for him regularly, and I trust that, first of all, I want to thank the Lord for him and allowing me to share with you. And hopefully, as he returns, he'll have some really good, encouraging energy and so forth to be able to minister to you continually for his glory. So I, again, express gratitude to both Mark, Pastor John, and the other church leaders for allowing me this opportunity to come and share with you. And while I am here, I am on vacation, and so it's just cool, just casual and just easy. So I'm relaxed. I feel fine. Had a great time with my daughter and family here. So thank you for allowing us this time to share. When the rooster crows, our family just picked up a couple of chickens in our home back in Bermuda, and so we have these chickens. Our neighbors, they decided they wanted to have some chickens in the yard, and so they came and they built a chicken coop, and it was really lovely. If you are from Bermuda or you know anything about Bermuda, it's awfully expensive to be in Bermuda. It's a lot of money for some eggs. So we thought we'll get chickens to kind of supplement that. And one of the problems, though, with chickens is they have roosters in the mix, And they were little when we got them, and as they grew, you don't know that they're hens until after a while. And then one of them, in fact, 2 of them turned out to be roosters, and a few of them were settling up near my son's room. I didn't hear them, but they can make a loud noise. I don't want to repeat the sound, but it is an awful noise, and they know how to crow. And so when the rooster crows, you know what's going on. You know something has just happened. You can hear it, and everybody is aware of it. I gather people are similar in kind. They just cackle and make noises and make loud noises and really don't always mean what they say, but they say it anyway. For example, you may remember former President of the United States, Bill Clinton, who said, "I did not have sex with that woman." You may have heard that if you were old enough. Trying to entice the people to recognize that perhaps he did not really do what was alleged that he had done, and it turned out later that he did do it. Another former president, George Bush, claimed that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and drove America into war, and they got there and discovered that there was nothing there. A lot of noise, a lot of cackling, but there was nothing there. And so I suppose that people perhaps say things, we often do, we say things out of anger maybe, perhaps, or out of passion, or we just say things for the purpose of misdirection. We want to drive people to think something different of us. We want to cause them to look away. And I submit to you that this is the scenario that was going on with Peter, that he was going through a process of trying to get people to look away from him. It's not about him. It's let's turn and look the other way. Let's not get all caught up in what my presence. I am nobody. And Peter was trying to deflect and distract, and so he got excited and he called off a couple of things, as we're going to look at in just a minute. If you continue to read or read previously, you have gone through already the Gospel of Mark. You were at chapter 14. You will discover that there was another gentleman that was accused of betraying Jesus. You remember, his name was Judas. And he was going to betray the Lord. In Mark 14 and verse 21, Jesus was asking the question, well, if that man should never have lived. I mean, it's worse for him. He should never have been born. And then, of course, in Matthew 10 and verse 33, the Bible suggests that we shouldn't deny the Lord either. So don't betray him, don't deny him. And the question I have is, which is worse? Betrayal, denial. Which is worse? Well, perhaps they're both as bad as one another, right? Except that maybe betrayal is a little bit more deceitful. There's a lot of falsehoods, there's a lot of pretense there. Someone comes up to you and says, I love you, brother, and they pat you on the back, all the while they're feeling for the soft spot to let the knife go through. That's betrayal. Judas did that, in essence, with Jesus when he went up and kissed him. Totally received by the Lord, totally believed by the other disciples, and then in that kiss, he betrays the Lord. But then denial seems to be another level or different spot. Because denial, on the other hand, seems to suggest that I'm not even in the picture. I've never been a part of this. And there were perhaps 3 steps that Peter went through just before the denial that placed him in a place where he would deny the Lord. There were 3 things that you should hold on to as we're going through this passage. And we're going to go through this passage in just a minute. But just 3 things. First of all, Peter created distance. In verse 54 of chapter 14, in verse 54, when Jesus was arrested after the betrayal, it says that Peter followed him at a distance. So the first step, if you will, toward denial is create space between you and the master, right? Distance. Let's push back away from the table so that it doesn't appear like we're with him, right? The second step in that same verse, in verse 54, was that it says that Peter followed him at a distance into the courtyard of the priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself by the fire. So perhaps the second step is not only creating space, but then it's also this idea of the company you keep. There's a verse in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33 that says, by J.B. Phillips' version says, bad company corrupts good morals. It's really interesting that sometimes the company that you keep causes you to literally deny Christ. So there's distance, and then there's the company that you keep. And then the third step would be that the language that you use to kind of make the point that you're separate and distant and that this is your new group now. And so you use the verbiage of that group. Back in Bermuda, there's a gentleman by the nickname Ice Water. This is his nickname. His nickname is Ice Water. He was a fisherman. And before Ice Water became a follower of Jesus, he was the harshest man you want to know, would ever meet. He had language that would come off his tongue that was harsh and strong, and you just wanted to be away from him. I was a boy on his boat out to sea and getting sick, and he just dropped expletives and said, "Boy, you better," and he was really harsh, and it was really, and I was afraid of him. I was afraid of him. Ice Water, by the way, has now become a follower of Jesus. He's still harsh. He's still brutal. But now he has a nice tongue. And the words that roll off his lips are, "Come to Jesus or you're going to go to hell." And I'm going, "Oh, okay. He's that way. That's his personality. So how do we see Peter literally denying the Lord with these three concepts? Distance, company, language. We're talking about the language. So in verse 66 of this chapter and following, we heard it read, and I'm not going to reread it, but I want to ask a couple of questions for us to think through the passage, just to kind of think your way through it. After being called by Jesus in chapter 1, verse 16, if you've already been through the study, you would have known that Peter and Andrew were called by the Lord. Remember, Andrew was the one who said, "Peter, come." And he brought Peter to Jesus. You remember that, right? And so now Peter is at the very front end, been invited to be a part of the band of disciples that was going to change the world, and they did. So Peter was, in fact, along with Andrew, one of the first converts or first disciples of Jesus. And he was with him for some three and a half years. So Peter, while being with Jesus over that period of time, got to see that Jesus was Lord over demons in chapter 1, verse 21. He was Lord over diseases in verse 29. He was Lord even when he was demonstrating his dependence on the Father in prayer in verse 35. That Jesus was Lord over sin when he not only brought a leper near, but literally touched the leper to remove his sin. Jesus was Lord of this. Peter got to see this. In chapter 2, Peter got to notice that Jesus was Lord over and able to forgive sins. Who can forgive sins but the Lord? He got to see, as we saw in the video in chapter 4 and verse 35 and following, that he was Lord over nature. One of my favorite stories is when Jesus just stills the storm. And he said, "Shh." And the storm settles. And Peter was there on the boat. And he said, "Is it you?" And another part of the story is he sees him walking on the water, and he gets out and he walks to him. "Peter, invite Jesus in the boat. Why are you going to go on the water to him? It's dangerous out there." But that's where Jesus is, by the way, on the side. Another story, the safest place is to be where Jesus is. Always. But Peter got to see that he was Lord over nature. He got to see that he was Lord over chaos. Remember that demon-possessed man who was cutting himself? And he got to see this, that Jesus was Lord over that. And the story goes that man was clothed and in his right mind. Prior to that, he was cutting himself. He was in the tombs. He was running havoc all over the city until he met Jesus, and Peter got to witness. Jesus is Lord over that. He's Lord over illness. He's Lord over chaos. He's Lord over death. For 3.5 years, Peter was walking with Jesus and got to see that. In fact, even after being with Jesus, he should have known that Jesus' predictions come to pass, that Jesus' word can be trusted. when Jesus said to Peter in chapter 14 and verse 30, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me thrice. And it was so, as we're going to see in a minute. That being with Jesus that amount of time, he should have known that he himself is not strong enough to even endure through prayer, that Peter can't make it by himself, because when Jesus took Peter, James, and John off and said, pray with me for a little bit and just watch and pray, because what's coming is really heavy for me and I need support and I need the Father and I need him. Pray with me, watch and pray. Jesus returns from prayer and comes back and finds Peter sleeping. And the verse in chapter 14 says, why are you sleeping? Couldn't you not watch with me? We'll see in a minute that had a real impact on Peter, because prior to that, Peter had said, I'm willing to die for you. And he couldn't even stay awake and pray with the Lord present. No fight, just pray. He couldn't do that. And so even then, he, at this point now, is totally discouraged. His master has been captured. His master is now about to enter into a serious mock trial. They're going to deceive him. They're going to lie about him. And they're going to tell multiple lies and get all sorts of stories coming up against Jesus. And Peter sees this. He witnesses this. In fact, I think it was Peter who was the one in the garden when Judas came to betray him. And with a kiss, when he saw this crowd coming, one gospel writer says that I believe it was Peter who sought to chop off the man's head and missed and just got his ear. And Jesus heals the man. Peter got to witness all of that. He was right there. And then we pick it up in verse 66. And it says, while Peter was below in the courtyard, the distance. And it says, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by, and when she saw Peter warming himself, the company, verse 67, the group, it says, and then she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene, she said. And as soon as she said that, the rooster makes a sound. The clock starts right at that point. So Peter denies, and the rooster goes, wah-wah. Now, like I mentioned, I have these crowing things, or had them. Our tenant got rid of them, hopefully. When we get back, it'll be quieter anyway. But you can't control when they make that sound, when they crow. They're just going to do it. And it's usually in succession. It happens that quickly. So what we're witnessing now is this rapid fire denial. It's happening very quickly, very fast. So the rooster crows. He denies and the rooster crows. And the words he uses are just astounding. The words he uses, verse 68. But he denied it. I don't know or understand what you are talking about, he said. And he went out into the entrance. So Peter is denying the Lord, has denied the Lord for the first time, and he makes this statement. And now we hear the rooster crowing, and we see the clock starting to tick, and this movement of now the prophecy that Jesus had already said was going to happen is happening right before our eyes. And Peter is right there going through this process. He has created distance. He's in a different company. And now he's using language that's inconsistent with somebody that would be a follower of Jesus. Verse 29 of the same chapter. Verse 29, Peter, the prediction of Peter's denial is happening, and Jesus says, Peter declared in verse 29, even if all fall away, I will not. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, today, yes, even tonight, before the cock crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. And Peter, verse 31, Peter instead insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will not disown you. And all the others said the same. Perhaps you're sitting here today and you think to yourself, I'm not going to be a Judas and betray the Lord. I will never betray him. And in fact, I will never even deny him. I can never deny my Lord, right? Perhaps you're sitting here with that belief about yourself. Might I suggest to you that we have more in common with Peter than we care to admit. And that given the right set of circumstances, you too might be tempted to want to deny Christ. I had my family in Pennsylvania some years ago. Brittany was a wee little one, and my other daughter, and I was studying for my master's, and we had a car, and the car wasn't working right, and so I took the car to Newport, New Jersey. A friend of mine's father had a garage there. And we get to the garage with my car. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus. My friend is a Christian. The owner of the business, his father is a Christian. And so I'm thinking all is fine. And then this man comes toward me, this really rough man, somebody that I would never ask even for directions. I would see this man coming in a distance. I wouldn't even ask this man for directions. And he came up to me. I'm in an area for the first time. I don't know anything about this area. My wife and my daughter are back in 30 minutes away in Pennsylvania. And this man says, "Do you know Jesus? Are you born again, baptized, and are you going to heaven?" Right that moment, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm in an area that I don't know. I've never been before. There were, at the same time, by the way, I forgot to mention that there was a bunch of guys on Harley Davidsons all in the city, So I'm thinking, these are gangsters. My life flashed before my eyes. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy is going to kill me or rob me. I left my wife 30 minutes away, my daughters. This is before the days of cell phones. So we couldn't even contact each other except through landlines. Do any of you know what a landline is? I mean, I was afraid. It happened quickly, but it happened. And it seemed to slow right down, and I felt like at that moment, I was prepared to say, no, I'm not a Christian. I'm just here trying to get my car fixed. I felt like saying that. But then I said, who wants to know? Because the answer is yes. But who wants to know? And he turned to me and says, "Praise God, so am I." Given the right set of circumstances, I would suggest that all of us would be like Peter, even at this moment. Distance is created. There's a different company that we're in that we might be tempted to say, I don't know him either. These are the words that Peter uses in verse 68. But he denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about. I don't know it or understand what you're talking about. By the way, it was only 4 hours prior that Peter said, not only will I never disown you, I will die for you. Just 4 hours earlier. Let us not sit and be tempted to think that this is not possible for me. I will never deny him. Given the right set of circumstances, perhaps it's possible. She goes on. The girl is adamant to the bystanders that he is with Jesus in verse 69. Then he denies it a second time in verse 70. And perhaps at this point, maybe it was his accent, that gave him away. She says, later on we discovered that he was from Galilee. So perhaps it might have been his accent. We were at, what's the place called? Carlisle Castle, I think it was, just the other day. You may have picked up a slight accent and perhaps now say, I understand some of the words that Brittany is saying and where they came from. Maybe, because she sounds so very proper, so very British. But this woman, we're walking around the castle and she says, pulls us aside. Excuse me, you wouldn't happen to be from Bermuda, would you? I said, Carlisle Castle is in the Lake District here, right? I said, well, yes, we are from Bermuda. She said, I knew it. I said, well, how did you know? She said, the way you said hum. I said, first of all, you should be paying attention to you and your husband walking around instead of listening to other people's conversations. But it was the way I said one word, hum. Did you hear you say it very differently. Turns out that our sister was from Bermuda, married a Bermudian. She had been to Bermuda, her and her husband, several times, and we were sharing stories about people we know and places we're familiar with. And it became 15 minutes of conversation. We didn't have a tour of the castle. We were talking about the relationship that we have to Bermuda. It was my accent that gave it away. Peter is in this company, in this crowd, and the little girl says, hey, you definitely are from there. In fact, we read later on in verse 70, and again he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, surely you are one of them. You are a Galilean. So clearly, in the conversation that they were having, in the company that he was keeping, he couldn't pretend that he was not from another place. He was definitely a foreigner. And here's where it raises, the level raises, it just turns. And Peter, verse 71, strongly denies knowing Christ the third time. And then he invokes a curse. This invoking of a curse is the idea of praying that God would hurt him if what he said is not true. And then swearing, using words to affirm that what he is saying at this point, I don't know him nor understand him, is true. And so he's using language that this company would be familiar with in order for them to actually for him to feel a part and for them to believe that he's a part of their group. He's using the same language that they would use. And he really calls down some serious words. Now, we tend to sanitize Scripture a lot. We tend to clean it up because we can't imagine that God would actually put in words the very things that happen. But the words here are strong language, strong cursing, strong words. If you were familiar with Philippians chapter 3 and verse 9, and the Old English Bibles use the word dung. Dung. We've cleaned it up in English, and we use words like rubbish. Or we use words like garbage. We've cleaned it up. But the word is dung. And even here, the language is so strong, and Peter's trying to get it across using the words that these people use. I don't know the bleep, bleep, bleep man. So get off my back. This is a strong denial, strong misdirection. This is former President Clinton saying, I did not have sex with that woman. Or when he was caught, said that he smoked marijuana when he was in college, says, I didn't inhale. How do you smoke marijuana? And the people said, see, there you have it. He's a good man. This is what Peter is doing. Misdirection. I don't know it. I don't know it. And the clock, and all of a sudden the rooster crows the second time. And all I can tell you is I don't know how much time went by, but it was very quick. 3 denials, just like that. The rooster starts off the denial process and ends with the rooster crowing. And look at the last verse, verse 72. Immediately the cock crowed, and the second time, then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. Before the cock crows twice, you would disown me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. And just for the sake of interest, if you're interested, the phrasing here, broke down and wept, it has more emphasis on the sound and the agony of the crying, not just tears rolling down your face, but this deep sobbing from inside that you have disappointed your master so deeply. And the sound that is like wailing coming off of is deep. And he recognized that he had just fulfilled what Jesus said about him, but he denied even ever knowing him. And he couldn't live with himself. And it came out and it was, it's that kind of weeping. This is not just, I think we read the Bible too quickly, quite frankly. And we don't meditate on these thoughts really a lot. But as he was going through this, and when he got to this place, the burden of his heart just was overwhelming. And he couldn't contain himself. And he went away weeping. This was not a cry of, a long-lost friend that you won't see again as they're getting on the plane and going away or whatever. This is a deep sobbing that you have offended somebody that you called friend for 3 years. One more thing before a couple more questions that I have to ask. Have you ever denied the Lord? Well, perhaps if you've ever had a moment in your life where you've created distance between you and God or you and the church, it's the beginning of that slide. Well, have you ever denied the Lord? Well, no, but perhaps if you are enjoying the company of unbelievers more than you're enjoying the company of God's people, distance, company. And then, have you ever denied Jesus? Well, no, but perhaps if you are using language that identifies you more with the group that you're with than the company you used to keep, than being with Jesus. You're using words that make you, the group think and you think that you're with them when in fact you belong over here with the Lord. You're using language that's inconsistent with being a follower of Jesus. Have you denied Jesus? Well, no, but maybe I've created distance, step one. Have you denied Jesus? Well, no, but maybe I'm more comfortable in a different company of people than I am with God's people, step two. Have you denied Jesus? Well, no, but perhaps I have been using language that identifies me with this group of unbelievers than with this group that belong to Christ. You have to answer that question. Let me hasten on. I have a couple more questions. Peter, in this whole story, uses a word in verse 68 and in verse 71, the word know. He says, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the man. What does that word know mean? Well, that word means, it doesn't mean that he never heard about Jesus, because we know that's not true, right? It doesn't mean that he didn't know about the circumstances that placed him where he was at the moment, because everybody, the whole city knew that Jesus was on trial. So it doesn't mean that. What does he mean when he says, I don't know him? This word know means to possess information about, to know about, to have knowledge of, to be acquainted with, to even experience a relationship with. I want to flip the question on its head. Peter, do you know Jesus? I want to turn that question around, turn it around, and I want to ask Jesus, who, by the way, was the one on trial. Do you know Peter? What do you think Jesus would have answered? How do you think Jesus would have answered that question? Do you know Peter? I submit to you, Jesus might have said something like this. This is glorified guesswork. Jesus might have said something like this. Yes, I remember when Andrew, his brother, brought him to me, and he was very skeptical. But I just poured my love out on him. Yeah, I remember when he first came, and I invited him to join our band, and he gave up fishing to come and join with us. I remember that deeply. That was our first time. I remember going fishing with Peter one day and asking him to, take me out in your boat and give us. And Peter said, "Father, Master, we've been out all day, all night, and caught nothing." And Jesus said, "Go and let your nets down on the other side." And so Peter did as he said and went and caught an abundance of fish, brought them in, and he falls at his feet and says, My Lord, I'm unworthy to be in your presence." And Jesus says, I remember that day. I remember that day very vividly. Perhaps Jesus might have also gone on to say, I remember the occasion when I was walking on the water, actually, and all of the disciples were in the boat, and it was dark, and they were all afraid. And Peter was the only one who said, "If it's you, come to me." I applaud such faith. Yeah, and I said, "Peter, come, Peter." And Peter went walking on the water. I remember that day. He was the only one of the disciples to do that. Yeah, I remember him. I remember when he started to look around and he recognized that he was in a space that he shouldn't have been in, he thought, and he started to sink, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." And God in Christ reached out his hand and pulled him back up and took him onto the boat, and everything was lovely. I remember him. I remember when I went to his house with his wife and his mother-in-law, who was desperately sick, and she just needed I healed her, and she went about serving the rest of us. And Peter was there in astonishment. Wow, he took care of my mother-in-law. Wow. Perhaps Jesus might have shared those kinds of stories if the question were reversed. And he would say, yes, I know Peter. I know him very well. There are a couple of verses that really bring me burden. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 23 says, I never knew you. If God were to say that about you, you've been around Christians in the church all this, if God were to say, I never knew you, that burdens my heart. John 17, verse 3 says that the issue is we need to learn to know God. We have to learn to know God. And we have to do so. Eternal life is in knowing Jesus as the Messiah. That's eternal life. Philippians 3, verse 10, Paul said, I want to know him more. I want to know him in the power of his resurrection and in the fellowship of his sufferings. And I want to become like him in his death. I want to know him more. So the question I'm going to leave us with as we finish is, how do you come to know Christ? And perhaps switching the question, how does Christ come to know you? Ephesians 2, verse 8 says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith." Through faith. Faith is this idea of faith is a conduit. This idea of faith is a pipe. It's not something that I bring, it's something that I go into, I step in. If you ever watch that factual movie, Finding Nemo, and they got on the turtles were going to Australia, and they got on the EAC, the Eastern Australian Current, just this jet stream that in the water that you travel on. You just hop in there, and it takes you where you got to go. That's the conduit. That's what faith is. Faith is getting into that jet stream, and the conduit's taking you, pointing you to Jesus. That's Ephesians 2. Ephesians 2, 8, 9 says, "For by grace are you saved through faith." I'm saved, but it's through faith. That's what I get on. So the question now is, what is faith? I'm finished now. What is faith? R.C. Sproul said faith is threefold. It's information, it's intellectual assent, and it's involvement. Faith is simply saying there is information for me to believe, data that's true, that I know it's true. And because it's true, I then give assent to it, intellectual assent. I say it is true. It's based on the where I got the information. This is the information. It is true because of the source of the information, and therefore I involve myself by actually believing what I just heard. We all have this. You exercise this kind of faith every day when you go shopping. You definitely exercise this faith when you walk across the street out here, because you know this traffic's coming right here all the time. You just have to exercise that faith. You say, I know the stoplight's going to stop the traffic, then I can walk across, and getting on the other side, I walk across, and then the lights turn green, and the traffic continues moving. You exercise this faith when you get on a plane. You exercise this faith all the time. And you exercise it this morning when you came here, and you sat in the chair because you believe that the chair is designed to hold your weight. That nobody cut the chair and tricked you. That's what faith is knowing, having information, giving assent to that information that the source of it is true, and then believing, involving yourself, resting, trusting. So Jesus goes to Peter in John chapter 21. And 3 times he says, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? And here's how Peter responded. You know. You know. You know. And when Jesus is able to say of you, I know you, come to me. That's the expression of faith, and that's the removal of denial. That's the removal of that's the removal of distance. That's the transferring of different company. You're in Christ's presence now, and now, you're using words and language that's consistent with being in the presence of the Messiah. You know. What are you going to do when the rooster crows? Let's pray. Father and God, I pray that this morning you will take your word and apply it to our hearts. Help each one present to understand the truth of the scriptures, that it's the word of God that speaks. And that I don't want to be classed in that number of being tempted to deny you by creating distance, being in bad company, and then using words that are not flattering to followers of Jesus. But help me instead to create nearness with you, to be in your company, and to use words that display I belong to Jesus, come what may. We pray this in Jesus' name.